He wasn't supposed to survive. The freezing rain hit Jack Morgan like a wall of ice, his breath shallow as he lay on the ground, unable to move. His body, battered and broken from the war, felt numb, and his hope was fading with each passing minute. He had been left behind, a casualty of a battle that was now over, and he was sure that no one would find him in time. But as the storm raged on, a small figure emerged from the darkness, Max. The German shepherd, his loyal canine companion, stood beside him, watching with sharp amber eyes. Max didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just stood there, waiting. The dog knew what he had to do. Max had never left Jack's side during their time in service, and now, in this desperate moment, he was all that Jack had left. The dog's presence was a reminder that loyalty didn't end with the mission. Jack's heart skipped a beat as Max lowered his head, sniffing the ground, his ears twitching. There was no doubt in Jack's mind. Max had found him, and Max wasn't going to leave him behind. As the minutes turned into hours, Jack's consciousness began to slip away. The cold was unbearable, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. He thought he could hear the faint sounds of footsteps, but his vision blurred, and he could no longer keep his eyes open. Everything went black, but Max was still there. The storm was too fierce for anyone to reach them, and yet Max kept his watch, never moving an inch, never leaving his partner's side. Through the night, Max remained vigilant, his body shivering against the cold, but he didn't care. He wasn't going to let Jack die alone. Hours passed, and the storm began to subside. In the distance, the faint sound of a rescue team's radio crackled to life. Max's ears perked up. He knew what was coming. The men arrived, their faces pale from the harsh weather. They had no idea that they were about to find more than just a soldier. They were about to witness a miracle. As the team rushed to Jack's side, Max stood back, watching them with unwavering loyalty. They checked Jack's pulse, confirming what they feared. The man was still alive, barely clinging to life. They moved quickly, wrapping Jack in blankets and getting him into the medical transport. Max, never far from Jack's side, followed them every step of the way. Jack was rushed to the hospital, still unconscious, but Max didn't leave. He stayed in the corner of the room, eyes fixed on his partner, watching over him like a guardian. Time passed, and Jack's condition worsened. The doctors weren't sure if he was going to pull through, but Max never gave up. Days later, when Jack finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Max, sitting quietly beside him. The dog's presence was a comfort, a reminder that, no matter how dark the situation seemed, there was always a glimmer of hope. Jack smiled weakly, reaching out to pat Max on the head. "You saved me, buddy," he whispered. Max wagged his tail, his eyes shining with a quiet understanding. The bond between them had always been strong, but now it was something more, a bond forged in the fires of war and tested in the coldest of nights. Jack knew he had been given a second chance, and he owed it all to Max, the dog who never left him behind. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Jack woke up to the soft beeping of machines and the sterile smell of the hospital room. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as he shifted under the covers. His mind was hazy, struggling to make sense of everything that had happened. The storm, the rescue, and then the overwhelming silence that followed. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Max. The German shepherd was still here, always by his side. Jack turned his head, and there, sitting at the foot of his bed, was the dog. Max's amber eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stood still. Max had been through so much, yet here he was, still waiting, still watching over him. Jack smiled faintly, his hand trembling as he reached out to pet Max's head. "You never gave up on me, did you, boy?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from days of silence. Max wagged his tail, nudging Jack's hand with his nose. Jack couldn't help but laugh softly. Even in his weakest state, Max had a way of making him feel like everything would be all right. As the days went on, Jack's condition began to improve. The doctors were amazed by his progress, and they started to speak in hopeful terms. But Jack knew the truth. He wasn't just here because of medical intervention. He was here because of Max. The bond they shared was something deeper than anything Jack could explain. It was a bond forged in the heat of battle, tempered by shared hardships, and solidified by loyalty that neither of them had ever questioned. One morning, Jack was able to sit up in bed, propped up by pillows. He gazed out the window, the sunlight streaming in, warming his face. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace. Max was curled up beside him, his body stretched out across the bed, his head resting on Jack's legs. Jack reached down and ran his fingers through Max's fur, marveling at how such a simple gesture could bring so much comfort. It was in these quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down, that Jack realized how much he owed to the dog. The weight of the war, the loss of his comrades, the scars he carried, both physical and emotional, had all been unbearable at times. But Max had been there, through it all. He hadn't been just a dog. He had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight in his chest lift just a little. He wasn't sure how he was going to move forward from here, but with Max by his side, he knew he didn't have to do it alone. In the days that followed, Jack was discharged from the hospital. The doctors were impressed with his recovery, but they had no idea about the real reason behind it. It wasn't just the treatment. It was the strength of the bond between Jack and Max, a bond that had given them both the will to survive. As Jack left the hospital, Max trotted beside him, his tail wagging in quiet triumph. They had both come through the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. With each step, Jack felt more and more like himself again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Max at his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Jack had been home for a few weeks now, trying to settle into a life that felt foreign after everything he had been through. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed too quiet, too empty. The walls, once filled with laughter and warmth, now stood still, echoing only the silence that came with loss. Yet, there was one thing that brought him comfort in the midst of it all: Max. The German Shepherd had become more than just a companion. He was Jack's anchor, a reminder that no matter how alone he felt, he was never truly by himself. Every morning, Jack would wake up to find Max at his side, his tail wagging softly, as if to remind him that life was still worth living. Max had never left Jack, not during the war, not through the storm, and certainly not now. Jack found himself talking to Max more than anyone else. The dog listened, his amber eyes attentive, his body language calm and steady. Sometimes, Jack would sit on the porch, staring out at the horizon, while Max lay quietly beside him. There were days when Jack didn't have the words, when the weight of his past felt too heavy to bear, but Max was always there, offering his silent support. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jack decided to take Max on a walk through the nearby park. It was a simple thing, something he hadn't done in a long time. The park was quiet, the kind of peaceful place that made Jack feel as though the world hadn't completely fallen apart. He could hear the birds in the trees and the rustle of the leaves in the wind. Max trotted beside him, his ears perked up, as if sensing the calm that surrounded them. Jack smiled softly. It wasn't much, but it was something. As they walked, Jack thought back to the days when he had first gotten Max. He had been skeptical, unsure if a dog could truly understand the bond he needed. But now, looking at Max, he knew there was no other being on earth who could have been more loyal, more understanding, and more present. The bond they shared was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. That night, as Jack sat on the couch with Max curled up at his feet, he realized that the journey ahead would still have its challenges. There were still days when the memories of the war haunted him, when the weight of the past threatened to pull him under. But with Max by his side, Jack knew he wasn't alone. The dog had seen him at his lowest, had stood by him when no one else would. And now, Max would help him rebuild. They were a team, just like they had always been. Jack's journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose. He had Max, and together, they would face whatever came next. There was a long road ahead, but Jack no longer had to walk it alone. The weeks continued to pass, and Jack found himself settling into a routine. It wasn't easy, not by any means, but it was a start. Max remained his constant companion, always there to remind him that life could still hold moments of peace. Some days were better than others. Some days, the memories of war crept in, and Jack would find himself staring off into space, lost in thought. But with Max by his side, those moments didn't last as long as they once had. Jack began to spend more time outside, walking through the park with Max, just like they had done that first afternoon. He took the time to notice the little things, the way the sun felt on his face, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the quiet joy of watching Max chase after a stick. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that there was still beauty in the world. One afternoon, Jack decided to visit the beach. It had been a while since he had been there, and the sound of the ocean always brought him a sense of calm. As they walked along the shore, the waves crashing softly against the sand, Jack couldn't help but think back to the days when he was stationed overseas. He had never imagined that life would bring him back to this place, to this moment of peace. The contrast was striking, the chaos of war now replaced by the calm of the ocean. Max ran ahead, his paws kicking up the sand as he bounded toward the water. Jack watched him with a soft smile, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It was moments like these that reminded him why he kept going, why he chose to fight through the hardest days. He had Max, and Max had him. That bond was unbreakable. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the water, Jack sat down on the sand, leaning back against a rock. Max trotted over to him, panting lightly, and laid down at his feet. The two of them sat in silence, watching the sky change colors as the day came to an end. Jack thought about all the things he had been through, the battles, the losses, the moments when he had felt completely alone. But now, with Max by his side, he didn't feel so alone anymore. There was still a long road ahead, but Jack was starting to believe that he could walk it. And no matter where that road led, he knew that Max would be with him every step of the way. As the months passed, Jack found himself adjusting to a life he never thought he would have again. The memories of the war still lingered, like shadows that refused to leave, but they didn't have the same power over him anymore. With Max by his side, he was learning how to live again. The quiet moments became his refuge, sitting on the porch with Max, taking walks through the park, and even just enjoying the simple act of breathing. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. One evening, Jack sat on the porch, staring out at the horizon as the sun began to set. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the cool evening air felt good on his skin. Max lay at his feet, his head resting on Jack's lap, as if to remind him that there was no place he had to be, no rush to go anywhere. Jack ran his fingers through Max's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest. It was in these quiet moments that Jack realized how much he had missed the small things, the things that used to go unnoticed. His mind wandered back to the days when everything was chaos, when every day was filled with uncertainty. It was hard to believe that he had come so far. There were still tough days, days when the weight of the past felt heavier than he could bear. But with Max at his side, those days didn't seem as impossible. Jack could feel the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about living. One afternoon, Jack decided to take a trip to a nearby town. It wasn't anything special, just a small town with quiet streets and local shops, but it was a place he had always wanted to visit. Max trotted alongside him, his tail wagging as they made their way down the main street. People smiled at the sight of the two of them, Jack with his military jacket and Max with his proud posture, always alert, always by his side. It felt good to walk among others, to feel a sense of normalcy that Jack had been longing for. They stopped at a small cafe, and Jack bought a cup of coffee to go. As he stood outside, Max sat patiently at his feet, his eyes scanning the surroundings, always keeping watch. Jack smiled down at him, grateful for the companionship that the dog had given him. "We're doing all right, aren't we, buddy?" Jack said softly. Max's tail wagged in response, and Jack felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. As they made their way back to the car, Jack thought about how far they had come together. The journey wasn't over, but with Max at his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. Life was unpredictable, but the one thing Jack knew for sure was that he wasn't walking through it alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The days continued to unfold slowly, and Jack's life began to feel more grounded. Max had become an irreplaceable part of his healing, and each day, their bond seemed to grow deeper. Jack spent more time outdoors, taking long walks with Max through the woods, where the quiet hum of nature calmed his mind. The world felt smaller now, more manageable, and the weight of the past seemed less pressing. Still, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he needed to do, something missing in his life that he hadn't quite figured out. One crisp morning, Jack sat on the porch with Max, watching the sun rise over the horizon. He took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. He had always loved this time of day. The world was still, and the possibilities for what lay ahead seemed endless. Max sat beside him, his head resting on Jack's leg, his eyes half closed, enjoying the peace. Jack scratched behind his ears, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're a good boy, Max," he muttered softly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. Max's tail gave a slow wag in response, and Jack felt his heart warm. He had been through so much, and yet here he was, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the world and the unshakable loyalty of his dog. Jack had come to realize that it was the simple things that mattered most, the moments of stillness, the quiet companionship, the feeling of being at peace with himself. And with Max at his side, he could finally begin to look forward to the future. As the weeks went on, Jack found himself becoming more involved in the community. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping to care for the dogs that reminded him so much of Max. The work was rewarding, and it gave Jack a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for a long time. He would often bring Max with him, watching as the dog interacted with the other animals, a gentle protector to the pups that looked up to him. Jack began to feel like he was part of something again, a place where he could make a difference. One afternoon, while working at the shelter, Jack came across a dog that seemed particularly skittish. It was a German shepherd, much younger than Max, but it had the same kind, loyal eyes. The dog seemed nervous, but there was something about it that caught Jack's attention. He knelt down to its level, offering a hand for the dog to sniff. It hesitated for a moment before cautiously stepping forward, its eyes filled with trust. Jack's heart softened. "It's all right," he whispered to the dog, gently running his fingers through its fur. "You're safe now." In that moment, Jack realized that he wasn't just healing for himself anymore. He was healing for others. He had a purpose now, one that went beyond his own recovery. He had Max by his side, and together, they could bring comfort to those who needed it most. As he watched the dog relax under his touch, Jack felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. The road to healing wasn't always clear, but with Max beside him, Jack was finally starting to feel whole again. As the months continued to pass, Jack began to feel more at ease with his new life. The weight of his past had not disappeared, but it no longer held him captive. Max had been his constant companion through every step of his recovery, offering comfort in ways Jack never thought possible. Their bond had grown deeper, and Jack felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the dog's loyalty. One bright Saturday morning, Jack decided to take a break from his usual routine. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining through the clouds and a gentle breeze blowing. He loaded Max into the car and set off for a nearby hiking trail, eager to explore the natural beauty of the area. Max's excitement was palpable as they arrived at the trailhead. The dog jumped out of the car and trotted ahead, his tail wagging in anticipation. Jack smiled to himself, feeling the same sense of excitement that Max did. It had been a long time since Jack had ventured out into nature like this, and the thought of spending time outdoors felt like a gift. As they made their way along the trail, Jack felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in a long while. The sounds of the forest surrounded him, the rustling of the leaves, the chirping of birds, the crunch of the gravel beneath his boots. It was a welcome change from the silence of his home. Max, as always, was a few steps ahead, his keen senses alert to everything around him. Jack marveled at how in tune the dog was with nature. It was as though Max could sense every little movement, every shift in the air. They stopped at a small clearing, and Jack took a moment to catch his breath, resting against a large tree. Max circled around him, sniffing the ground, his ears twitching at the faintest sounds. Jack reached down to pet him, his hand brushing through Max's thick fur. "You're one special dog, you know that?" Jack said quietly, the words more of a reflection than a statement. Max sat beside him, looking up with his amber eyes, as if understanding the depth of Jack's words. Jack realized, in that moment, how much he had come to rely on Max, not just for the physical comfort of having a companion, but for the emotional support that had helped him heal. It was through Max that Jack had learned to trust again, to believe in the possibility of a future that didn't feel defined by loss. As they continued their hike, Jack felt a renewed sense of hope. The world around him seemed brighter, the colors more vivid. He wasn't the same person who had first returned home, overwhelmed by the weight of his past. He had found a new purpose in life, and with Max at his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking it alone. Max had proven that time and time again. And together, they would continue to move forward, one step at a time. The summer days seemed to stretch on forever, but Jack didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was living at his own pace. No longer driven by the urgency of the past, he took his days as they came, finding joy in the little things. A morning cup of coffee, the feel of Max's fur under his hand, the sound of birds in the trees. Jack had made peace with the things he could not change, and in doing so, he had found a new sense of freedom. He still had bad days, of course. There were moments when the memories of war resurfaced, when the weight of loss pressed down on him harder than he could bear. But now, he knew how to manage those moments. He would take a deep breath, look at Max, and remind himself that he wasn't alone. Max had become his rock, the one constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Jack and Max went for a walk down the familiar trail in the woods. The path was quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps and the rustling of leaves around them. Jack took in the beauty of the forest, the way the light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. He hadn't always appreciated the small things in life, but now they seemed to hold so much more meaning. Max trotted ahead, his tail held high as he explored every inch of the trail. Jack smiled to himself, feeling a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. As they reached a small clearing, Jack stopped and sat down on a large rock. Max immediately sat beside him, resting his head on Jack's lap. The two of them sat there in silence, watching the sun slowly set behind the trees. Jack looked down at Max, his heart full. "You know, I don't know what I would do without you," Jack said softly. Max's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and he looked up at Jack with those deep amber eyes that always seemed to understand. Jack reached down and gently scratched behind Max's ears, feeling the warmth of his fur against his fingers. He had come a long way since he had returned home, and he owed so much of that to Max. It wasn't just that the dog had been there for him physically. It was the emotional support that had been even more important. Max had been a steady presence in Jack's life when everything else had felt uncertain. Jack had learned to trust again, to open himself up to the possibility of healing, and to believe that there was a future worth fighting for. As the last light of the day faded, Jack stood up, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. Max stood with him, as always, and the two of them walked back down the trail together. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. He had Max by his side, and that made all the difference. The sun had started to dip lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields as Jack stood at the edge of the small town, gazing out at the familiar landscape. Max sat beside him, his gaze equally fixed on the view, his fur catching the last rays of the day. The peaceful stillness of the moment was a reminder of how far Jack had come. It had been a year since that stormy night in the woods when he had thought he wouldn't make it. Now, he stood here, grounded, with purpose in his heart, and Max by his side. As Jack reflected on the past, he realized that his life had changed in ways he never expected. He had always been driven by the mission, by the next task, the next goal. But now it was different. He had learned to embrace the quiet, to find peace in the moments in between. Max had shown him that, in a way that no one else could. The dog had been his constant companion, his protector, and his friend. Together, they had healed in ways neither of them could have done alone. They had faced the storms of life, both literally and figuratively, and had come out stronger. As Jack took a deep breath, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He wasn't the same man he had been when he first returned home. The shadows of his past still lingered, but they no longer held power over him. He had found a new sense of purpose, one that wasn't about fighting battles or achieving glory, but about living fully in each moment, no matter how small it might seem. Jack turned to look at Max, who had shifted his position, his ears perked as if he was sensing something Jack couldn't. "What is it, buddy?" Jack asked, kneeling down to give Max a scratch behind the ears. The dog's tail wagged slightly, but he didn't move. Jack chuckled softly, standing up again. "Still keeping watch, huh?" he said, the bond between them more evident than ever. Max had always been there, even when Jack didn't realize he needed him. He had taught Jack the true meaning of loyalty, not as a soldier to his country, but as a man to his dog, and vice versa. They had both endured so much, yet here they were, standing together, ready for whatever life had in store next. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. Jack smiled as he looked at the sky, the colors shifting from orange to pink to purple. Life was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He and Max were in it together. And with that, Jack felt ready to face whatever came next. The future didn't seem so daunting when he had Max by his side, walking with him every step of the way. It was a crisp autumn day when Jack and Max found themselves back in the woods, this time walking along a path they had never taken before. The leaves on the trees had turned shades of gold and amber, and the cool breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. Jack looked around, taking in the familiar peace of the forest. He had always loved being out here, but today felt different. It was as if something had shifted within him. He wasn't just walking for the sake of getting from one place to another. He was walking because he finally felt like he belonged. Max trotted ahead, his nose to the ground, ears alert. Jack smiled as he watched the dog. Max had been his constant companion for so long, and yet there was always something new to discover about their bond. Max had a way of sensing things Jack couldn't, and it was that instinct, that deep connection between them, that had kept them both going. The trail led them deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thicker and the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade away. Jack felt a sense of calm wash over him, as if the forest was embracing him, reminding him that he was part of something bigger. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath and listening to the wind rustling through the trees. It was in these moments that Jack felt truly alive, when he could forget the noise of the world and just be. Max came back to him, his tail wagging as he looked up with those trusting eyes. Jack crouched down and scratched behind Max's ears, the connection between them as strong as ever. "You've been with me through it all, haven't you?" Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Max didn't need to respond. His presence said everything. As they continued their walk, Jack felt a sense of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. He had come so far from the man he used to be, the man who had returned home broken and unsure of his place in the world. But with Max by his side, Jack had found his way. The dog had taught him the value of loyalty, of trust, and of living in the moment. Jack knew that his journey wasn't over. There would still be days when the past would try to pull him back, when the weight of his experiences would feel too heavy to bear. But now, he had Max to remind him that no matter what came next, he wasn't alone. Together, they had faced the storms, and together, they would face whatever the future held. As they made their way back down the trail, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first met Max, and he wasn't the same person he had been when he returned from war. He was stronger, more at peace with himself, and ready for whatever came next. Max walked beside him, as loyal and true as ever. And for the first time in a long time, Jack knew that no matter where the road took them, they would walk it together. As the seasons continued to change, Jack and Max found a new rhythm in life. The mornings had grown colder, and the world around them was shifting into the soft embrace of fall. Jack had always loved this time of year, the way the world seemed to slow down, to take a deep breath before the rush of winter. It was a time for reflection, for appreciation, and for finding peace in the quiet moments. Max had never been more at ease. He had adjusted to life at Jack's side, and Jack could see the dog's confidence growing each day. They spent their mornings walking through the park, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound breaking the silence. Max always led the way, trotting ahead with his usual energy, but he would always circle back to make sure Jack was still behind him, always checking in, always there. One particular afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Jack decided to take Max to the lake. It was a place they had visited often, a quiet spot surrounded by trees, where the water was calm and the air was fresh. The lake always had a way of bringing Jack peace, a feeling of being rooted in something bigger than himself. As they reached the edge of the water, Jack stopped and stood for a moment, taking in the beauty of the scene. The golden light reflected off the surface of the lake, casting a soft glow over the trees that lined the shore. Max walked up beside him, sitting down as he gazed out over the water. Jack smiled, reaching down to give Max a scratch behind the ears. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said quietly. Max turned his head, meeting Jack's gaze with those loyal, amber eyes. It was as if the dog understood exactly what Jack meant. They had both come through so much, and yet here they were, together in this peaceful moment, with the world at their feet. Jack thought about everything he had been through, the struggles, the pain, the moments of doubt. But now, standing here with Max, he could see that all of it had led to this. He had found his way back to himself, to the life he had once thought was lost forever. Max had been there through it all, never once wavering, never once letting him fall. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the small ones, like this one, where Jack could simply exist, in peace, with the dog who had saved him in more ways than one. As the sun set behind them, casting a final burst of color across the sky, Jack felt a sense of gratitude fill his heart. He wasn't sure what the future held, but with Max by his side, he was ready to face it. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jack knew that no matter what came next, he would be all right. They would face it together, as they always had. And that was enough. The cold air of winter was beginning to settle in, but Jack didn't mind. It had been a season of growth for both him and Max, and now, as the first snowflakes began to fall, he felt ready for whatever came next. The quiet of the world around him felt comforting, calm, reflective, and steady. Jack had spent so much time running from his past, running from his emotions, but now, with the dog by his side, he found solace in stillness. The mornings were crisp, and the evenings were longer, perfect for quiet walks with Max by his side. They would walk through the park, the snow crunching under their feet, as the world seemed to slow down around them. Jack would often find himself lost in thought, thinking about how far he had come, how much had changed since the days when he felt as though his world was falling apart. But now, he had Max, and that made all the difference. Max had been there when Jack needed him most, when the weight of the world felt unbearable. The dog's loyalty and presence had anchored Jack, giving him the strength to keep moving forward. And in turn, Jack had become more present, more aware of the simple joys of life. One afternoon, as the snow continued to fall gently, Jack found himself sitting on the porch with Max, watching the world around them. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated the quiet neighborhood, and the sound of children's laughter echoed from a distance. Jack felt a quiet peace in his heart, something he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at Max, who was sitting beside him, his head resting on Jack's knee. The dog's eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt as though they were the only two souls in the world. Jack ran his hand through Max's fur, the connection between them so strong that words didn't seem necessary. He didn't need to speak to know that Max understood. The bond they shared was deeper than anything Jack had ever experienced. It wasn't just about the walks or the moments of peace. They were a team, in every sense of the word. Jack had learned to live again, to embrace the quiet moments, and he had learned that it was okay to let go of the past. As the night grew colder and the snow began to blanket the ground, Jack felt a sense of contentment settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He and Max would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt ready for whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't as daunting as it once seemed. With Max by his side, Jack knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would walk through them together, just as they always had. As winter continued to blanket the town in a soft layer of snow, Jack and Max found themselves once again walking through the quiet streets, the world around them serene and untouched. The harsh winds of the past had softened, and the landscape was now a peaceful reflection of their journey. Jack felt a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years, a quiet comfort in knowing that this was his life now. No longer defined by the struggles he had left behind, but shaped by the love and loyalty of the dog beside him. The days had grown shorter, but Jack didn't mind. With each passing day, he found more peace in the stillness. He had come to appreciate the moments of calm, the simple acts of daily life, and the company of the one who had never left his side. The bond they shared had become more than just companionship. It had become a partnership, a mutual understanding that no words were needed to express how deeply they cared for each other. One evening, as the cold air nipped at their cheeks, Jack sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, with Max lying at his feet. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, stars twinkling brightly in the vastness. It was a clear night, the kind that made everything feel possible. Jack stared up at the sky, thinking about everything that had brought him here. The battles, the losses, the moments when he had felt hopeless. But now, sitting here with Max, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance, for the peace he had found, and for the unwavering loyalty of the dog who had stood by him through it all. Max lifted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the starlight, as if sensing the quiet joy Jack was feeling. The dog's presence was a constant reminder that, no matter how uncertain life could be, there was always something worth holding on to. Jack gently reached down and stroked Max's fur, his heart full. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" he whispered. Max nuzzled his hand, a soft and simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Jack smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. They had walked through the hardest days together, and now, they were here, side by side, in this moment of stillness. The future still felt unknown, but with Max by his side, Jack knew he was ready for whatever came next. As the night wore on and the chill in the air deepened, Jack stayed outside, savoring the calm that had become his new normal. He no longer felt trapped by his past, but free to move forward, to embrace the life that was unfolding before him. With Max beside him, the road ahead no longer seemed daunting. It felt like a path of possibility, one they would walk together, step by step.